You ready? Great. We have had quite a few sessions of this type and discussed many basic ideas, many basic principles. The last one being the aspect of sight. We explained how physical sight, the sense of sight, is infinitely more powerful and more significant than any other of the other senses. And we also explained the effect of it in terms of Avodas Hashem, very briefly. And I want to go further in this vein and point out the profound effect that it has. I'm not so much interested in the sight, but I'm more interested in the effect and the significance that comes from it. The one question that will point our way to in this investigation and getting to understand the Inyan is that we see that many things in Yiddishkeit are so described that the appearance seems to be more important than the content. For instance, the most obvious one, B'sten Shemin Esrei. And we have to stand Shemin Esrei precisely in a certain way. Put both feet together, standing, facing the east, not looking out, not having anything in your hand, just being concentrated and dedicated to this stand. And this is a principle in Shemin Esrei. And then you're supposed to also, obviously, think of what you're saying. But we say thinking and understanding the words that you're saying and keeping track, being with it, is very important. But that's, if you say Shemin Esrei in a proper way, and you just said the words and your thoughts were elsewhere, you've satisfied the obligation of Shemin Esrei, of Daven, of Tefillah. You've done it. Except for the first bracha, when you need kavanah, but otherwise you could say the words and your mind is floating around and you're Yotze Shemin Esrei. And if you say and you have all the kavanahs, but you're walking around and looking around, you're not Yotze Shemin Esrei. You have to daven all over again. What's in this seemingly reverse than the truth? Chitzoni is the type of aspect in Yiddishkeit. And we know clearly that Yiddishkeit is all Pnimius, all Emunah. By Shabbos, you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos except within a Reshus HaYochid, a private domain. If you have a large area, like a courtyard, that borders with someone else's courtyard, so therefore it's no longer private, isolated for you, because it mixes with the other. So what do we do to make it private? That it should be permitted to carry within your private domain. We put up a stick, another stick facing it, quite a distance away, and we draw one string on top, on top of these sticks, and we say that this constitutes a separation. Tzuras HaPesach, because it has the form of an entrance rather than just a breakthrough. It constitutes separation. Practically speaking, these two sticks do not separate between the two yards, between the two people anymore, with or without them. And yet we say, no, this constitutes separation. Again, we're talking about an appearance. As a matter of fact, in Halacha, this is called Tzuras HaPesach. Tzuras HaPesach means the form, the appearance of an entrance. And this goes to such an extent that you can make the entire surrounding of the courtyard all made up of Tzuras HaPesach on all four sides. There's not even a single fence, real fence between the 2 yards. And it becomes a kosher place and shus yochid. What's behind this? Another interesting Indian. Regarding Shemoneh Esrei, the Tefillah, it says that Shemoneh Esrei you have to stand in a certain way, because this is when you're actually standing in front of Hashem. And this is why Shemoneh Esrei consists of saying, Baruch Ato Hashem. You're speaking to Hashem directly. You're standing in front of a king, you have to stand in a certain way. In a disciplined way, in a respectful way. Everybody knows that every bracha starts with Baruch Ato Hashem. When you make a bracha on an apple, you say Baruch Ato Hashem. What's the difference between the Baruch Ato Hashem that you say when you make a bracha and the Baruch Ato Hashem that you say Shemoneh Esrei? When you make a bracha, you're not required to stand up and stand at attention and say Baruch Ato Hashem. You can sit and make a bracha. And this will allow us to go into the depth of this inyan that we discussed last week. Essentially, we pointed out that among the 4 or 5 senses of touch, smell, taste, sound, hearing, and sight, is the most sensitive one and is the most effective in a person. The effect of sight is not only in the fact that when you saw something, there is absolutely no way that someone can come and contradict what you saw, because you're convinced beyond doubt. In every other sense, even though the senses allow you to relate to objects around you, outside of yourself, and you know for sure that you felt something and so forth, but never in the same degree of conviction as in sight. In Hasidus, this is called knowing the mehus, whereas every other sense lets you know the mitzius. Mitzius and mehus, these are two Lashon Kodesh words, Hebrew words. Mitzius means the presence, the existence of something, and mehus means the essence of what it represents, what it stands for. in every other form of knowledge, of awareness, we are aware of things from the prospect of how these things can affect us. Like we discussed, if you have to walk from here to there, and there's a table in the middle, so you know there is something in the middle because you can't walk, you can't execute on what you want to pursue. Everything has to do with how it affects us. Taste, smell, hearing. Clearly, you know it because of your personal experience. So that you know the thing only to the extent that it affects you. Sight is the one place where you know the thing as it is unto itself, independent of yourself. You know that it's truly an object. It's truly there. Not because it affects you, but because it's truly there. This is the power of sight. In effect, it is true to say that the reason that we become aware that there is such a thing as an absolute truth, it is because of the faculty of self-sight. And I mentioned to you last time that at halacha, that someone who is Nachmanides sightless, he is considered kimes. He's dead. He's part of all the mitzvahs. He's part of all the mitzvahs, as I did. Because in order to do a mitzvah, you have to have the awareness, as we'll discuss and I'll explain to you, that there is a true existence outside of yourself. And that's only possible with sight. Without sight, you know only everything through your own experience. That's not true knowledge.
What if you lose your sight?
I'm sorry?
What if you lose your sight?
If you lose your sight, we also discussed it last time, that has shown if you lose your sight, clearly you are losing sight, so to speak. You're losing the sense currently of the reality of things, and it no longer has the same effect on you. But nevertheless, because you have had sight previously, you already have a certain idea. You have an idea of what reality is. And they explained last week that that this is a profound difference between someone who was born sightless, Rahman Islam, and someone who lost his sight sometimes later, because he has a sense of what reality is. When we learn, each one of us wants to know what our lives are about. What am I doing here? What is this all about? What am I supposed to do? How am I going to... Everyone asks this question somewhat differently from his own perspective. But essentially, how am I going to... What path should I pursue so that I will have a sense of happiness, personal satisfaction, meaning in my life, accomplishing what I'm supposed to accomplish, get to know what I'm supposed to know. Whatever the pursuit is, something along the lines of getting some kind of a handle on one's life and know where I'm going and what I'm looking for and how to get there. We do not want to be the inadvertent, what inadvertent means, unintentional effect of the outside pressures. In other words, I don't have a personal desire, a personal path in life. Whatever the circumstance requires, wherever the circumstance throws me, that's what I follow. That's one thing we don't want. You want to know where we're going? If I'm in yeshiva, so I'm in yeshiva, so I'm in yeshiva bach. If I'm in the street, so I'm a street boy. We want to have a certain perspective, a certain sense of what we are under all circumstances. Surely there are going to be nisyonis. It's easier to be what I want in the yeshiva than to be outside of the yeshiva, but still I know who I am. This is the concept, in the animal world. There are fish, and there are dry land animals, and there are water animals. Generally speaking, dry land animals are called warm-blooded animals. And water animals, fish, are cold-blooded animals. What does that mean?
Their body heats up their cold.
The dry land animals, their body always maintains the same temperature under all circumstances. When they are in a hot climate, the body cools them off through water intake and so forth. When they're in the cold environment, the body produces heat. But the body has to maintain a certain temperature. If it's below that temperature too much or above that temperature, then he's not well. If the human body temperature is on the Fahrenheit scale like 98, if he reaches 101, 102, he feels sick, just 2 degrees above normal. Or if he reaches down to 96, 95, he feels weak. Regardless of where he is, he can be in the tropical climate. If his body temperature goes down to 96, he will feel sick. He's not dependent on the outside. He has his own barometer. Whereas the fish, the water animals, their temperature actually changes according to the environment where they are. When they're in cold water, their body loses its heat, goes down to a lower temperature. When they're hot, whether they're in a higher temperature. And it doesn't bother them. They live because they're part of the water. They're not independent entities. Fish have a din, apidin, they're part of the water. So this just illustrates the concept that a human being needs. This is just even physically, but the spiritually it is much more so. He needs a perspective of where he is and where he is going. And this is what we're pursuing here. In this pursuit and in this very question, there are 2 general areas. One is dependent on his thoughts and his knowledge, of the person's personal knowledge. What he thinks and how he understands things, how he interprets things. We could say, in general, that this is what we call the other 4 senses. What things taste like, what things feel like, what things smell like. Surely this is in the physical arena, and the same thing in the spiritual arena. When you learn something that makes sense, so you say it makes sense, oh, it tastes good. It sounds right. It fits with my thinking process. If it doesn't, then he feels uncomfortable and he's looking for an answer. He says, "Oh, there is a contradiction here." Similarly, in terms of his midos, in terms of his attributes, in terms of his actions, he seeks to make sense that his actions and his likes and dislikes, his affections should be proper. This is something which is part of his personal experience. Then there is another, much broader aspect in a person's life. And that is not just merely what I think, but what is the reality? What is the reality of which I am part? It is definitely possible for a person to blind himself, to obliviate himself to his environment, to the reality, so to speak, and say, oh, it feels good. It's right. It makes sense to me. It's right. Just as the difference between the four senses and the sight. The four senses, if a person feels something in his hand, whether he wants to or not, he will feel it. If he feels something hitting him, he didn't want to feel the hit, but he will feel it. There's no way that he can obliviate himself from it. It hits him. This is true in hearing, this is true in taste, this is true in smell. There's no way that he can avoid being affected by that which he senses. Sight is the one much more refined, you could say spiritual almost, faculty, that you see it only if you look at it. It can be right in front of you. And it doesn't force itself upon you. You see it only if you keep your eyes open. If you want to close your eyes, it's not there. It has no effect on you at all. It's totally not there.
Isn't the same with hearing? Close your ears and not hearing?
Right. The difference is in two things. Number one, closing your eyes is a natural phenomenon. In other words, your eyes have the flaps to close them. And they're open only if you want to keep them open. Whereas closing eyes, clogging your ears is not a natural phenomenon. Naturally, you cannot obliterate. And then furthermore, closing your eyes literally blinds it. It's not there. To clog your ears to the point where the sound just disappears, you may not hear clearly what is being said, but that the sound disappears is very, very difficult. It somehow is going to penetrate through anything that you put in front of it. It's not. There is no way. It's just hitting you. It's the same thing. Like you put a padding on your hand. The boxers, they put padding. They still feel it. There's no way. But it's padded. It doesn't hurt the same way. There's no way that any of the senses can be completely obliviated. Because sight is a spiritual thing. And what is the spirit of sight? Just to reiterate, because it will come in handy as we develop this Indian. The spiritual, the aspect of the sight is, because in sight you know the thing, not how it affects you, but how the thing is truly to itself. So if you don't want to know it, you don't know it. It doesn't come to bother you. But then, as we said, this is the finest and the highest of all senses. And what this gives you is not just that you know this particular object or this particular object. Sight also gives you the knowledge and the sense that there is a total existence, total environment. Not just that there are things that affect you, but you become aware. As a result of sight, we human beings know that we live within a large world, within a large existence, and we begin to surmise and begin to make sense of the world itself, like we spoke many times before, that the world itself clearly represents not just a blob of existence, but a very orderly and organized existence, made specifically to suit our being. All vegetation in the world is made for us, for our sustenance. Day and night and the whole environment and the seasons, this is all part of the cycle of the world to support that supports the existence of the world in a very orderly and organized way. So this is the other aspect that a person naturally seeks if his eyes are open, not closed, which means that he has an intellectual insight. That he wants to know not just what is this for and what is this for, but he wants to know what is the general meaning of existence and how he relates to it. What is his place in it? Not just how to react to various things, what is the right thing to do and is the wrong thing to do. But what is the total picture and where he fits into it. We learn in the Torah, as we mentioned before, when the Torah introduces the world to us, it doesn't first say there is a world and where does the world come from? God created it. It says that the first thing, God created the world. Which means that we really have the capacity and we really recognize in the very existence of the world as such, we recognize it from a deep internal perspective, not when we start examining it scientifically and asking questions, but when we look at it with the faculty of sight, whether it's physical sight or intellectual sight, we know that the world, the reality of the world is not self-made, that the world makes itself real. The reason it is real is because it is created. We see in the world the reality of the creator rather than the object that is there.
Well, you see the object, right? But if you're blind, why does it really matter if you see the object as long as you know that the creator created it? I mean, like, it's not. This only really blocks us from seeing that it's actually a Hashem. Like, when we look at this, we can't directly see that it's Hashem. Whereas a blind person, it would be even easier for him, in my opinion, to see that it's Hashem that created it.
Well,
You understand?
I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that since we see it as a physical object, we are kind of drawn to the physical object rather than the spiritual meaning of the object. To explain, to draw the point which I'm making in answer to your question, the reason that we are drawn to the object when we see it, you know what? Hold off a little bit. I'll come back to it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
I don't understand what you mean when you say that when we see an object, we see the reality of the creator. No, you said the creator's reality.
Right.
What does that mean when we see the creator's
I'll
reality?
explain to you. We have also mentioned this sometime in the past, I don't know exactly in which one of the sessions, that to relate something that we have seen is very challenging and very difficult. But after we go through the challenge and we explain precisely what it is that we have seen, we always sense that yes, I related certain aspects of it, but I did not transmit the real meaning of having seen it. And as we pointed out, that if a person knows every detail of a certain phenomenon, like I think we mentioned in Niagara Falls, he knows everything about it. When he comes upon it and sees it, it's an entirely different experience. No one will say, I don't have to go and see Niagara Falls because I read about it. It doesn't substitute at all, nowhere. Which means that inside there is an observation, there is some experience inside that does not exist in any place, anything else. However, and this will lead us to answer your question, I have seen the Niagara Falls and I can come and tell you, here's what I saw. So what am I capable of transmitting and what am I not capable of transmitting?
Asking this is rhetorical.
Well, it's a rhetorical question. You're not all going to speak at the same time. But I'm answering for you because I'm sure more or less this is what you would answer. We are able to transmit that which we can translate from sight to hearing. How high it is, how loud the noise is, how the clouds look, and how wide a span it is. In other words, that which can be measured in other terms, either hearing or touch. In other words, how big it is, and how wide it is, and how high is the fall, and how much water it is. All is measurable in totally different terms. So therefore, what we did there, we took the experience of sight and we put aside the essential experience of the sight, and we took out of it that which we can translate in other terms. This is called taking the chitzonius of it, but not the pnimis, not the very essence of the experience of having seen it. I think I mentioned to you in one session when we spoke about this, that the similar thing we see in Torah, that the Torah, Hashem gave us the Torah at Har Sinai. We're coming to Matan Torah. He gave us the Torah at Har Sinai. And He gave us a whole Torah, the Aseres HaDibros and the whole Torah we have. And there's a mitzvah in the Torah, which we all mention every day after davening. One of the six mitzvahs of remembrance is you should never forget the day you stood at Har Sinai. What's so important to remember the day you stood at Har Sinai? You have to remember the Torah that you were given. You have to learn the Torah and remember it. What's so important about the experience of having stood there and received the Torah? As a matter of fact, at a time when they stood there and received the Torah, you only received the Aseres HaDibros. The Torah has so much more. What's the meaning? We shouldn't forget that. Because this relates to the true aspect of having seen, of sight. That there you've actually seen the real thing. What did you see? You see Hashem giving you the Torah. Which means that you know the verity, the meaning of the Torah, not just because it makes sense, because you understand it, because you absorb it, because it directs you how to live, but because you've seen its reality. The reality that Hashem has given you Torah. You've seen it with your own eyes. That has a totally different effect. Every word in the Torah points to Hashem. It's an interesting Indian. The Gemara says that, I'm deviating slightly, but just to be able to answer your question. The Gemara says that a person should learn Torah regardless what his intent is. Because really, to learn Torah properly, you have to learn what's called learning Torah Lishma. I'm sure you heard the word learning Torah Lishma. Lishma means learning Torah with a pure intent. However that is done and whatever that means. If a person learns Torah without the pure intent, that means, let's say, he learns Torah because he enjoys learning Torah. He learns Torah in order to acquire knowledge and to develop himself and to be a mensch. And many aspects in between. So that's not a pure intent of learning Torah. So the Gemara says, Lo'olam yilmad Adam Torah, no matter what the reason is. He should learn Torah no matter what his motivation is, whether it's Lishma or not Lishma. Why? But afterwards you have to learn Torah properly. The Gemara says the reason is because mitoich shaloi lishma bo lishma. By learning Torah shaloi lishma, not with the proper intent, this will eventually bring you to learning Torah lishma. How is it going to bring you to learning Torah lishma? The answer is because every word in Torah points to the truth of Torah. Ever so slightly, ever so subtly. But it all points to the truth. What is the truth of Torah? That this is Hashem's word, and that Hashem is directly talking to you, directly instructing you on this inyan. And you can, and you, Lishmo means that you sense how Hashem is giving you that instruction. It's not just something that makes sense and logical, but this is a godly word. You sense the godliness in the word. So even though you don't sense it, but nevertheless inherent in it are as the kedusha, inherent in it is the godliness in every word, and therefore ultimately it has that effect that it turns you back to Hashem. So everything in Torah has a godly quality, and yet we are instructed in the Torah that you must never forget the experience of the sight, the experience of being there by Hamat Torah. Why? Because of this quality that I pointed out, that there is that aspect that is translatable in words, translatable in other forms, and that aspect of sight which is not translatable. And that aspect in sight which is not translatable, that is the most profound of it. That is what points to the truth of existence. Why? And I explained to you before. Because that which is translatable in other forms is something which you know through personal touch, personal relating to it. That which you know through personally relating to it does not tell you about the truth of the object. It tells you about your own truth. Whereas sight tells you that there is really a world besides yourself, really a true world. The fact is, I see it, even though it doesn't affect me. That means that you see that there is real truth. So this is in answer to your question. When you see the object, so if you look at the object without the effect of sight, in other words, you look at the object in terms of its weight and its size and its color, its appearance, you know what I'm saying, the other things which are translatable in other forms, then the object kind of says, oh, it is a physical object. But if you actually allow, and not only if you, without the if, there is the effect of the sight without you even being aware of it. That besides its weight and besides its color and size and form, you see that it's a real thing. And this is what connects a person to reality, really. And this is why you can tell yourself, I'm doing the right thing and I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, and yet you still feel uncomfortable. Something is missing. And what's missing is not the question, are you doing the right thing or the wrong thing? What's missing is, where is the reality of it? Where is the total reality? How does it connect me to the total reality? Yes, for me this is right. But I'm not satisfied just to do what's right for me. I want to know that is right in an absolute sense. Because I sense that there is an absolute truth. I want to know how true it is in an absolute sense. So we deviated slightly, but now I'm coming back and we'll use all of the... You understand the answer to your question? When we make a bracha, before we eat an apple, or drink water, for that matter, you can choose the fruit that you want. We are making a bracha because we, with our seichel, understand that this apple belongs to Hashem. And you are thanking Hashem for giving it to you. And that's why that's what permits you to eat it. Which means that at this time you are actually oriented in the world, not in the front of Hashem. You're in Hashem's world. But in the world itself, you know that everything in the world belongs to Hashem, and therefore if you take part of it, you have to recognize it and acknowledge it. We once spoke about it, maybe sometime we'll discuss it even more deeply, the meaning of a bracha. And this is true throughout a person's day, whether it's eating, whether it's making brachas, bichas hashachar, whether it is in Sukkot de Zimra, and even Kriya Shema. Even Kriya Shema. A person says Shema, Al Pi Din, you don't have to be standing, you don't have to be sitting, you can even be lying down, you can even be doing things, except for the first pasuk of Shema. Because the idea of there is what you are thinking, what you are recognizing, what you are understanding. That's why Shema, what Shema means? Shema means hear, implying understand. Not just hear the words, but understand. Think about this. So essentially, throughout the person's day, we find ourselves in the world that Hashem made, and knowing and understanding and believing that this is the world that Hashem made, therefore we behave appropriately. And we don't take things and deal with them and use them in the wrong way. But when we come to Shmoyne Esrei is called the Tefillah. Shmoyne Esrei is in a different category. What is the different category? Shmoyne Esrei is when we actually stand in front of Hashem. Which means not that we just think about Hashem, like we do make a bracha. We are right there, even whether we think about Him or we don't, this is where we are. That's the meaning of Shmoyne Esrei, of Tefillah. This is why, when we say the Shmoyne Esrei, we stand in a certain way. And you also know that before we start Shmoyne Esrei, we make 3 steps to approach it. And when we finish Shmoyne Esrei, we walk back 3 steps. Because this is how it's appropriate to behave when you are, in fact, in the presence of, in front of the king. It's an entirely different situation. What is this situation? Coming back from what we've discussed. The entire day all depends on what you think and how much you are conscious of what you're doing. How much of your seichel and midas are involved in what you're doing. Because that's all it is. You are essentially in the world, and you have to be careful how you behave, to do the right thing and not to do the wrong thing. When you are in Shemoneh Esrei, in a certain sense, what you are thinking is not what defines where you are. How you stand, that's what defines how you are. Because if you are in the presence of the king, regardless of what you think, you're still in the presence of the king. You're still there. The reality of it is still is true regardless of what your thoughts are. How do we understand it? This is what I'm trying to explain in terms of the faculty of sight. Sight gives us a sense that something is there, real, regardless of how it affects me, regardless of whether I have any connection to it, it means anything to me, or it's just or not. It's just the reality of it. The Shemoneh Esrei is the time when we have the reality of the presence of Hashem. Not because I think of it, not because I understand it, but because that's the fact. That's what is now happening. This is why in Shemoneh Esrei they have this paradox. You have to stand very erect and act in a certain respectable manner. But your thoughts, if your thoughts are not with you, they're elsewhere, it does not cancel out your davening. Why? Because the reality is you are standing in front of Hashem. If your thoughts are not there because your thoughts are not disciplined yet and you're not up to that point, so you're not up to that point yourself, but it doesn't mean that you're not in the palace. Does that mean that you're not in actual fact in front of the king? So this phenomenon that you have a certain recognition, a certain reality, because it is real unto itself. It is intrinsically, absolutely real. Not because you are aware and understand it. This is what's illustrated in the faculty of sight. Sight gives us a sense of the reality of the world without us understanding it and knowing what it is. What does this mean to us, practically speaking? As I started saying before, everyone is kind of looking and trying to perfect, trying to get a feel for something, a feel for what his life is, a feel for what he's doing, a feel for the world, a feel for something, to feel directed and to feel solid in his path. Every once in a while, all kinds of doubts, just like we said before, you stand in Shemoneh Esrei in front of Hashem, and your mind is flowing elsewhere. The fact that you're standing in a disciplined and a respectful manner doesn't necessarily say what is going through your mind and heart. You believe in it, you know that this is true, and that's why you stand like this. But your mind is not necessarily, your internal thinking process is not necessarily fully disciplined in that. Because of this, it is conceivable that no matter of the fact that this is what we're looking for at something and we really believe in it and so forth, we still have this simple struggle. And I want to kind of help us to understand what the struggle is about. Where on the one hand, I see clearly what I want to do. I see clearly what the truth is. And on the other hand, I'm full of doubt, full of questions. And what happens is, either way that I turn, when I turn fully to that which I know and I kind of feel, I see this to be the truth. So at that moment, I feel quite confident, quite satisfied. But then something inside begins to gnaw at me and say, but what about this and what about that? You're missing out in the world, you're missing out whatever, a basketball game. When you say, okay, so then I'm going to turn the other way. So it seems also for a moment, oh, that would be quite interesting. But where's the reality? You know, what is this all about? And this is something which can hardly be resolved. And for this, what we need to understand is that we actually see the world at two levels. We actually have two perspectives. In simple terms it is, with the faculty of sight and with all other faculties. And in a deeper, in a ruchnisdike sense, is that we actually recognize deep down the overall truth. A truth that is in which we are part, not which we make up with our seichel, not which we make up with our experience, but of which we are a real part of. And then there is another truth, the truth of my experience, the truth of my activities. So that we have to understand that neither one of these is contradictory to the other. And neither one of these can be eliminated, can be ignored. The real person is just as we have in davening. We have in davening when we sit and we daven, when we say words and we are relating to the world. And then we have the moment in davening when we say Shemoneh. We don't say Shemoneh the whole davening. We say Shemoneh only a certain part of davening. And this is how it is true in a person's life and in a complete daily cycle. There are the moments when he is recognizing and he's reflective of the overall meaning of life, overall meaning of his place in the world and his mission and his shlichus. And then there is lion's share of the day where he's involved in simply learning and identifying certain details of his life, how you're supposed to act, and what does this mean, and what does this mean. Only the combination of both is what complements a person. This is why, just want to point out the power of this. It says that in every human thought there is an aspect of truth. Human feels a certain way, thinks a certain way, he has a certain reaction to things. There's an aspect of truth. After all, the human being's mind, he saw it this way. There's an aspect of truth in everything that he thinks. But only in the Torah presentation of the human being and of human life is there the total truth, that which encompasses and gives him the complete, wholesome and direction in life, not just in one direction or another. He can go and say, "Oh, you're supposed to be healthy." Can anybody argue about the need to be healthy? No argument at all. So one can go and spend his whole day in exercising. I'm being healthy. But then you ask him, okay, you're healthy, so what now? What now? What is being healthy for? What are you going to do with that health? Being healthy in itself becomes the whole purpose in life. There has to be something else. Being healthy for something. This is such a, simple and gross illustration of everything in the world. Torah, now it's everything in the world will justify, will explain one aspect of a person's life or another. Torah has both, the top, from the top to the bottom, the entire spectrum of a person's life. This is why I mentioned in the previous time, if you recall, that it is an interesting phenomenon that in the world, in the scientific world, the faculty, the sense of sight is something which they don't like. It interferes with science.
So that they don't like?
Right. Because in other words, it misleads you. There is no aspect of the in the scientific world that is based on sight. It's based on measurement, on weight, on direction. But just because it's seen, it doesn't make it real. Were you here last time?
Yeah.
Okay. I just mentioned it right away. To incorporate all aspects of the human being, meaning the truth of his soul and the truth of his body, the truth of all the faculties that connect the soul to the body. This is what Torah life is. And this is why it makes sense to stand Shemoneh Esrei, and you have to stand Shemoneh Esrei erect in a precise manner as is described. Even though that your thoughts are not always where they should be. And yet, this is Mamash Shemoneh Esrei. Why? Because the Shemoneh Esrei is not dependent on what you do, it depends on where you are. And in Shemoneh Esrei, you are in front of the Meibush, in front of Hashem. That's a reality. Just because your thoughts are elsewhere doesn't mean that you were not there. And the same thing like with the other illustrations that I pointed out, like Shabbos, you make a fence. Al Pidin, this constitutes a fence. Even though, practically speaking, it doesn't affect you. It doesn't change anything. You can go through right underneath this little wire. Because there is a true reality in the world. The true godly reality in the world. It's not only the way we see it, the way we interpret it, the way we are affected by it, but a true reality in itself. This is why there is that possibility that the things are just designed externally, and that's their definition. Without there being the internal, the logical aspect of it. This is the message for today.
Can you take a question?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's Rashi who comments, at the time of Matan Torah, there seemed to be a change in the aspects of the senses of those who were experiencing it. They saw the things that were normally heard, and they heard the things that were normally seen.
Mm-hmm.
Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. I mean, clearly it's really a subject all by itself, but in context of what we spoke, since these sounds were godly sounds, it says later on, not in this Seder, in Dvorim, when there is a repeat of the whole episode, it says Koil Godel V'lo Yosef. There was a sound, Lo Yosef. The word Lo Yosef means there was no addition. And there are many interpretations of that. What does it mean there was no addition? One shot, a simple thing, is that type of sound never repeated itself. It was only once in the world history. But there's another one, very interesting thing. The Rebbe once explained it. Lo Yosef means there was no secondary sound. There was no echo. Sound, no echo. Why there's no echo? Every sound reverberates and hits an object and it echoes. And the explanation is, and the answer is, you have to be able to relate to it. The explanation is this. This was a godly sound. Normally, what constitutes an echo? It is that the sound waves hit a solid object, which does not permit the sound waves to go through it, and therefore it simply reverberates back, and that's how you get an echo. Because the object cannot absorb this sound. It's a sound that contradicts, that comes in conflict with this object. But God's words did not come in conflict with anything. Everything in all existence absorbed these words. There was no reverberation. There was nothing that rejected it. And that's why there was no echo. So therefore these sounds, when it says Royim as Anishma, that they saw that which is normally heard, and they heard that which is normally only the property of sight, it is not that their faculties changed. It is that the sound had the quality. Normally sound has a quality that it pertains only to your ears, because it doesn't have that truth of sight, like we said before. And sight, like we said before, what is the quote-unquote the shortcoming of sight? That you can ignore it. You can close your eyes to it and not see it. And here, the sound was complete, was at the level of sight, which means the sound was so true that you heard it not as something that you hear because it hits your eardrums, but because it's absolutely true. And you saw, that's why you were able to see the sight. And you heard the sight. What means you heard the sight? you cannot ignore it. It was not a sight that you can close your eyes to, because it was sight through and through. This is what I mentioned last week, I think, when I explained about Shema Yisrael, that you close your eyes when you say Shema Yisrael. Right? You close your eyes when you say Shema. And what are you supposed to think? Hashem Echod, that the Echod means Aleph Ches Dalet, that there is one Hashem in the Ches, in the 8, in other words, the 7 heavens and the earth, that's 8, and Dalet in the 4 corners of the world, in all 4 directions of the world. So the question is, if you're supposed to relate to up and down, and right, left, and front and back, why are you closing your eyes? With open eyes, you can see there is an up and down, and there is right and left. With closed eyes, there's nothing there. So what's the point of, what does it mean you close your eyes? And then say Aleph Chazdal. Then there's only Aleph, there's only one thing, you don't see any directives, any dimensions. The answer is that we are referring to a sense that a person has. This is much to be spoken about. There's sense, an internal sense that a person has of dimensions that are not because there's a measurable distance from me to there, but because he recognizes that there is the inherent truth of existence. The inherent truth of existence in a person's deep crevices of his mind consists of a spread. There is an up and down, and there are sides. It's not because of what we see with our eyes, which is just the physical aspect, which means this is an undeniable dimension, which is there in a person's mind when he closes his eyes. And this is where he could see that it's Aleph, that it's all one. When he opens his eyes, on the contrary, he has a difficulty in seeing it, because this is there and that's there. But when he closes his eyes, that's when he senses that the dimensions which are inherent in his thought are really one. That means, this is the pshat, that you have sight, dimensions, but this is a sight which is undeniable, which you can't close your eyes to. And that's why it's called, you heard what you saw. Any other piece of wisdom for anybody? Next time. Okay.
Hi. So this